This We the People News. Not attorney, not giving legal advice. Educational purposes only. Okay, just my opinion. Never look straight forward. Always look around you. Be able to protect yourself by any means necessary. Arm yourself with knowledge. All right? There you go. And, by the way, use your First Amendment. Learn how to petition your redress in writing and take your case to the legislature and tell them, knock it off, behave, and start impeaching some of these judges.
Parliament has no authority whatsoever. And then on top of it, we are declaring it void. Now, of course, they're asking for them to get rid of them, but we are declaring them void. Of course, we know that smuggling and other things were making them void in practice and effect. Well, from there, Mike Maharrey points out that Jefferson was making the case that it wasn't so much the negative impact of these acts that made them problematic. And a lot of people focus on that. They focus on, well, do I like the end result of this? Do I dislike the end result? And that's all they care about. They don't think about the constitutional issue, the precedent, which really is the underlying foundation of all of it. Because if you can give government the power to do something just because some people like it, you're always going to find some other people who like any type of power that government exercises. That's not what makes for a good reason for government to do stuff. They're only authorized to do stuff that they're authorized to do. Anything beyond that is a nullity that we need to declare void. So,
and go with that. How many people actually out there that thinks that the judicial branch is actually operating in a constitutional authority and actually using a judicial branch, or it's actually administrative and the judges created their down status as a magistrate, right? But even when they are judicial, they have immunity. But once they decide to act in administratively, now that immunity is waived. So for some of you guys to think about, right? So if they're using administrative, they're a magistrate, and they just lost their immunity. And you can sue them. They don't have it. Now to get another judge to actually go with it, again, if they're acting in dishonor and they kind of rule against you and all that, keep the stuff written down, do a petition, use your, like Texas is Article 1, Section 15, and impeach the judges. We got to clean this mess up.
Jefferson wasn't pointing out that it was the negative impact, although he went through that in some detail. He was asserting a more fundamental principle. Whether good or bad, Mike writes, these acts were null and void simply because they crossed a line in the sand and usurped power that rightly belonged to the people of the colonies.
And what we call that? Battery, domestic abuse, and trespassing.
Jefferson went on to point out that these exercises of usurped power, usurpation, is an exercise of power not authorized to government. It's a theft of power from the sovereign people. The people where power all flows from, if they say you can only do this, this, and this, and then they add another thing to it, that is stealing power that rightly belongs with the people. So usurpation of power, what St. George Tucker later called treason against the sovereignty of the people. Jefferson was a big fan of Tucker's work as well. He said these were not confined to the economic acts already listed, but, quote, they have also intermeddled with the regulations of the internal affairs of the colony. So first he says all this external stuff, of course, a lot of people may have been okay with it just as long as you stick with that, but don't mess with us in here. But he pointed out, like, look, all you have to do is look at what they're doing and they're going to make it worse. And now we see that they have certainly tried to do much worse things on internal regulation. And then he cited a bunch of acts that most of us are usually more familiar with. There's the Sugar Act, that's 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, the Declaratory Act, which they passed as a slap in the face. Benjamin Franklin was originally okay with it and then realized it was a big problem. A slap in the face as they repealed the Stamp Act due to the nullification and popular resistance to it. The Declaratory Act, which claimed power over the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Unlimited power in every single situation. He then went on to take a very direct and particular aim at the Townsend Acts and the Coercive Acts. And he specifically here talked about the New York Restraining Act, which dissolved the legislature of New York. John Dickinson, his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania in 1767, also took direct aim at this one as well. But he points out, here's how Jefferson put it, but that one other act, passed in the same 7th year of the reign, having been a peculiar attempt, must ever require peculiar mention. It is entitled An Act for Suspending the Legislature of New York. This is another act of massive despotism to Thomas Jefferson. He said, one free and independent legislature hereby takes upon itself to suspend the powers of another, free and independent as itself, thus exhibiting a phenomenon unknown in nature, the creator and creature of its own power. And you see this again in the Kentucky Resolutions of 1798. He said, if the government gets to determine the limit of its own power, there is no limits to its power. You're basically left to their goodwill, and that's not really a good thing at all.
So if the government gets to investigate themselves, they give themselves unlimited power, which in the 1947 Administrative Act, what do they do with that? They force that administrative on everybody, ignores the Constitution, which gives them unlimited power and investigate themselves. That's the reason why the Chevron was kind of struck down. But again, it relies on to the judge to interpret the statute when it don't have no authority to even do that. The statute was created by Congress. Therefore, the Supreme Court should have told Congress to quit making it so vague. That way, when it comes into my court, we can understand it and clearly and lawfully rule into what parties favor, according to the statute. But the Supreme Court didn't say that because they're not smart enough to think about that.
Not only the principles of common sense, but the common feelings of human nature must be surrendered up before His Majesty's subjects here can be persuaded to believe that they hold their political existence at the will of a British Parliament. That was about the New York Restraining Act. But then he asked the essential questions. Well, who the heck are these people, and what gives them the right to rule over us in the first place? How can they suspend our ability to conduct things the way we want to locally? And they did it through violence and force. Anyways, he said, without attempting a distinction between the guilty and the innocent. He's talking about the issues of the Boston Port Act as well, which was kind of a collective punishment, really, for the Tea Party in 1773. And he points out, they're not separating, they're punishing, they're shutting down the entire port, they're stopping trade. And he's saying, you're not actually going, even if you were saying that those few people who threw the tea into the harbor needed to be punished, what you're doing is you're punishing everybody. He said the 100th.
Right there. We just did a video a while back, a few videos now, right? One of the child committed a crime, and now the parents are going to prison. Same principle right here, y'all. Same principle.
Not the 100th part of the inhabitants of that town had been concerned in the act complained of. Many of them were in Great Britain and in other parts beyond sea. Yet all were involved in one indiscriminate ruin by a new executive power unheard of till then, that of a British Parliament. So Parliament then gets to shut down the entire port and punish everybody specifically until restitution is made to the tea company. And this is, again, collective punishment. It is not treating people as individuals. He said a property of the value of many millions of money was sacrificed to revenge, not repay the loss of a few thousands. This is administering justice with a heavy hand indeed. This was collective punishment, something we see a lot of that over and over and over. Now, he said these are acts of power assumed by a body of men.